Do you want to know how to process a landscape photo in Lightroom without going too far, correcting things such as color casts and adding just a touch of color just to make it pop just that little bit more? Welcome to my channel. My name is Julian Elliott. I'm a professional landscape and travel photographer. If you want to keep up with what I'm doing, then make sure you click on the subscribe button down there in the bottom right hand corner. Before you start processing any photo in Lightroom or indeed Photoshop Camera Raw, make sure that you have as much information as you can in that raw file. That will help us to get the best out of the image and produce a result that is a lot more pleasing than if we're having to do shortcuts and trying to blend false skies and all sorts of things. It just isn't the right way to do it, or as I believe it's not the right way to do it. I want it to look the best that I can and the most natural that I can. So what I'm going to show in the following tutorials is how I'm currently processing my work. And notice that I say currently because I'm always looking at different ways in which I can process my work and also improve how I'm working. And it's something that you must do as well. You must always be looking at how you're producing your work and asking yourself all the time, am I producing this in the right way? Is there any way that I can improve? So enough of the chit chat, let's get on to the tutorial itself on how I'm currently processing my landscape photos in Lightroom. Okay, before I begin anything with image adjustments, the first thing that I want to know is, are there any dust spots on my image? It is unfortunately an inevitable consequence of changing your lenses all the time, and if, like me, you're changing them all the time when you're out in the field, then you inevitably will get those dust spots all over the place. So the first thing to do is, if I press the Q key on my keyboard, what that will do is it will activate the dust spot tool, so you can see that there. Now before I just go a bit further, I'm actually just going to turn that off. I'm going to zoom in 100% on the image so that I can see any spots better. So if I click that Q key again to activate the dust spot, the next thing I want to do is press the A on my keyboard. What that will do is it will activate the visualize spots layer, and you can see here where there might be any dust spots. So right here there looks to be a dust spot, so the first thing to do is let's remove that dust spot. If I just draw that back over there, I'm going to press down the space bar on my keyboard. That gives me the hand, and then over here there's another dust spot around here. So that's the first thing that I would do in any image editing stages that I'm going to do in my workflow. I want to make sure that there's no dust spots anywhere at all. So with that dealt with, let's press the Q key to deactivate that and then zoom the image back out again. That's dust spots done and dusted, as it were. What's next? Once I've removed the dust spots from my image, I then start looking at these panels down here, and the first thing that I do is I actually go to camera calibration. So if I open this up, you'll see at the moment it's on the process of 2012 and a profile of Adobe Standard. For me at the moment this is my current process, as I'm on Adobe Lightroom CC 2015, as I haven't yet upgraded to the new version, but I will do at some point very soon. And then the profile, so at the moment it's on Adobe Standard. So if you click in here, you'll see a number of different profiles. What I want is I actually want camera neutral. If you pay close attention to the bottom tree line, you will see as soon as I click camera neutral, there is a visible change already. Why do I want camera neutral? Because it's neutral. That is the one and only reason that I want that. So that's that part dealt with. What's next? With camera calibration out the way, the next thing that I move on to is my lens corrections. When I click in here, you'll see there's various options that I can use. The two that are interesting me with this particular photo is the Enable Profile Corrections to remove any lens distortion. And you'll see there's a tiny bit of lens distortion that's been removed there. I click it off and then on again, you'll see that. And then the next thing I want is the chromatic aberration, as obviously I don't want any of that nasty fringing that goes around on the edges, like up around here on this tree line here. So there's a bit of fringing there. So let's just click that. The majority of the time, that's all I really need to do in there. I don't really need to go into the color panel, for example, and then start doing the defringing in here. A lot of the time it gets rid of what I want. So that's lens corrections dealt with. Once I've dealt with my lens corrections, I then start looking at the histogram, and I try to pay attention to where the peaks are in this histogram as well as the corners. Now obviously we've heard a lot of things such as you want to expose to the right, etc., and not towards the left. If you see here, the histogram is going not quite into the corner, so that means I've got good detail in my shadows. And if you look over here on the right hand side, it's not clipping on the highlights. If you press the J key on your keyboard, what that will do is it will turn on the indicator to show you whether any highlights or shadows are being blown. At the moment, nothing is, so let's turn that off. The next thing that I'm going to do is I go to my basic panel. In here, we have a number of options. The first thing that I always look at is the white balance. Now, with the white balance, I did actually use the in-camera white balance. So I set it with my eyes when I was on location in the Val di Funès, and I set it as I thought it looked, but at the moment it does appear there is some kind of color cast on it. Now if you look up in the histogram up here, if you look at all these peaks and troughs here and these different colors, the yellow, green, red, blues, etc. If you notice the blue here, this is indicating a very sharp color cast in the blue area of the image. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab hold of my temperature slider and I'm going to push it towards the right to try and remove that color cast. So if you watch how the blue is affected, so it's coming across quite nicely and being removed, probably somewhere around there. You can see up here that this color cast in the blue has been removed. Obviously I've introduced some blue into the shadows there. You'll also notice that there's a bit of this magenta here, so at the moment you can see it's headed towards plus 24, so let's take care of that. So let's grab hold of that slider, put it to the left to start removing that, somewhere around there, and then that's starting to look a lot better than it was. So if I just do before and then after on my keyboard, so you've got a couple of different options here. If you press Y, for example, it will show you before and after. So you can see there's a marked difference in the two images. If I press Y again to cancel that out. If you also press the backslash key on your keyboard, that is another way of activating the before and the after. If I just do that, you'll see there's the before and then the after, where you'll see the color cast start to disappear. So that's the color cast taken care of. Where do we move to next? Well, I then start looking at the whites, and I just want to push the whites across to the right hand side there. A little tip, if you're not aware of this one, is if you hold down the Alt key on your keyboard and then grab hold of the whites slider, and this works for all of these if I remember correctly, you can then start to see where too much white is going in. So if I push it right across, you'll see there's too much white there, so let's pull it back somewhere around there. And then I've put in a lot more white and spread the histogram out. The next thing that I like to do is put in a bit of shadow. Now obviously I don't want to put in too much, just enough that pleases me, somewhere probably around there. And then the next thing that I'm going to do is probably, for some people they're thinking, why on earth are you going to do that? I'm actually going to push the exposure up, and I want to just brighten the image up. It is a little bit of a case of taking a hammer to crack a nut, as I could actually blend this correctly if I wanted to. I just want to push it somewhere around there. Now, of course, if I click on the J key, you'll see the sky starting to be overexposed there. Now I want to bring back that sky, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use my graduated filter to bring that back in. So pull that down. At the moment I actually have something on which is called the Show Selected Mask Overlay. So that's your O button, or your O key I should say. That turns it on and off. So let's pull that down somewhere around there. Press O to remove it. Off it goes. Let's pull the exposure down, and then let's start to bring the sky back in how I remember it in my head, probably somewhere around there. And then what I'm going to do is close that down, and I'm going to push some whites back up again, and maybe also just push the exposure back just a little bit. So I might also, let's go back into the grad again, maybe pull that down, and maybe just pull down the exposure just a little bit more. So it's starting to look better again. So if I then look at the before and then the after, you'll start to see there is a marked difference between the before and then the after. Right, so that's that. So the next thing that I have to think about is I've pulled this graduated filter down. Now the problem of course is with grads, whether it be in camera or in Lightroom, as soon as you pull a grad down and you start to darken the sky, then as soon as that grad, so if I turn it back on again, where you see the line going across there, if I turn the overlay off, then obviously that's the line of the grad, which is then cutting into the hill. What can we do about that? If I turn the O back on to see where the grad is, and I then click on the brush tool within the graduated filter, within the brush tool there is an erase tool. And what this is going to do is it's going to take out all of this red that I have in here because of the graduated filter. So one of the things I want to do is I need to enlarge my brush. Now you can either use the bracket keys to decrease with the left bracket key, or increase the size of your brush with the right bracket key, or as I have with my Mac, I have a scroll mouse, so I can just push the mouse and then I can increase my brush size very, very easily. If I want to adjust the flow, for example, I can also hold down the shift key, and then you can see, if I just put the brush there, you might be able to see the flow then is being adjusted as well. So that's that. Now, not the flow, sorry, that's the feather that's being adjusted. So I'm just going to push the feathering up, maybe just a tad. Now the flow at the moment is on 100%, so that's going to remove this red very, very quickly. So what I'm going to do is just remove that, and then you'll see in the next segment that red will have been removed. So I've finished brushing away around this sort of tree line around here and over here. So as you can see, the grad is being eaten into with this erase tool. Now, something I didn't mention is auto mask is turned on, and what that does is when you have like this tree line here and the sky, there's obviously a layer of contrast there, and it's trying to automatically detect where it is. But do be careful when you're using it. It doesn't always work out that you want to remove everything. So for example, just when I was filming this, just before when I was filming this next sequence, I erased the grad from the mountain, and it looked a little bit false, so I'm keeping it in for the moment just to see how it works overall. So that's the graduated filter. Now where do I go from here? Well, I'm going to close the grad down. I then want to add in some clarity to my image. Now just be aware that when you're putting clarity into your picture, that it will start to desaturate some of the colors. So if I push the clarity right up to 100, you will see that lovely green meadow is just become very, very washed out. So be very gentle when you use clarity. So I'm going to push it back probably around 20 to 30 or so, and then just see what that gives me, somewhere maybe around there. So that's on about 20. And then I just want to pump just a little bit more color in. Now obviously we have vibrance and saturation there. I know people love saturation. I don't. I really don't like this slider. It just is too much. So the vibrance is very nice and gentle. So we'll just put in some vibrance to the image, and that will just pump in a the color where the clarity took it out. So let's just put it somewhere around there. So as you'll see, again, if I press the Y key on my keyboard, that things are starting to shape up very nicely. So that's the basic panel. Where do I go from here? After the basic panel, I may turn to the tone curve. When it comes to the tone curve, we've got two ways of using it, well, three ways of using it. So at the moment it's set on RGB, or you can, as you saw, drop down to have the individual channels there, red, green and blue. And you can, of course, change it to this other curve here, which is highlights, lights, darks and shadows. I personally prefer it on RGB because then I can target specific color cast. So for example, you can see that there's still a bit of a blue color cast there. For the moment, I'm not going to touch it. I kind of like the image the way it is. So that's the tone curve. Next up is going to be the HSL panel. Now with HSL, hue, saturation and luminance, we can very specifically target colors and tonalities in the image and also the lightness of those colors. I'm not going to touch the hue because hue changes color. So for example, you can see there you've got the red, which can then be pushed to orange, or it's magenta back there. And then of course you've got orange, which can go over to yellow, etc. So we can do some weird and wonderful things and probably just start making it look very kind of Instagram, how people love that kind of thing. So I'm just going to reset that. Quick resets, hold down your Alt key and then click on the resets. That resets everything. Let's get rid of that. But what I do want to do is put a little bit of saturation in specific places on my image just to give it just a little bit more. So if I grab this tool here, you'll see there's a target. So if you push it up, it pumps it in, and you push it down, then it takes it away. So let's put a bit of color in the green down here, just a tiny bit. And then also the colors down here in the trees, as they were really nice that day. And that's going up just a little bit. Let's maybe touch the sky. Let's have a look. Just put a little bit of color in that sky. So it's just a touch. It's just not much. It has to be very, very light. So let's go to luminance. So this is going to be the lightness of those tones within the image. So I can see here that if I grab hold of this again, normally what happens is when you're going around this, you'll see it jumping around on the red, orange, yellow, or those different colors there. So let's just push it up here. So just put a bit of red there. Let's see if it's going to do. Even pull it down. It's too much going down. So let's just push it just somewhere just around, just over red. And then let's pump in a bit more color back in these trees. Just lighten those up a bit. So let's see if we darken them. So let's bring that down. So it looks okay there. I can start to see that there's a lot of color coming. I'm just going to take this and bring down that red just ever so slightly. It looks as though it's starting to go too much for my taste. So that's, again, adding in a bit more color. From here, you could go to split toning. Every so often I use this, and you can add in just a little bit more of an effect, some cross-processing, that kind of stuff, but it's not really something I really want to do on this image. From here, I then want to go down to the details panel. So from here, this is going to be the sharpening. Now, a little tip, if you're not aware of this, if you hold down the Alt key when you're doing the sharpening, you'll see that the image turns white. I think it's white. If I hold down Alt and then click on sharpening, white or black, there you go, it goes black and whites, then you can start to see how much is being sharpened. Always sharpen your images at 100% so you can see what's going on. So at the moment, as you can see, it looks pretty sharp. The lens was at f11, it's a sharp lens anyway. So I'm just going to pump some sharpening into this. So put it up somewhere around there, looks quite nice. And then let's turn to the radius. Now radius, again, when you hold down the Alt key, you can see what's going on. So if I push it right up, when my screen catches up, there you go, you can see the effect the radius is having. So let's pull that right back. I don't need it that much at all. Less than 1 is normal for my images, somewhere around 0.5, 0.6. And then you'll see when it catches up, here we go. So you can see it's starting to look really nice. Detail, again, hold down the Alt key. When you push the slider, you can see how much effect it's having. Normally I seem to end up around 30, 35, so I'll just leave that there. And then I'm going to zoom out, and then the masking. Now the masking, at the moment everything is being sharpened, and what the masking is going to do is I don't, for example, want any sharpening in the sky. So if I hold down the Alt key and then draw the slider to the right with the mask, we will see it turns white, and then it will eventually catch up, and I can then mask out the sky, as I don't want the sky to be sharpened at all in my image. So probably somewhere around there. And there we go. So that's the detail panel. From there, I'm not going to worry too much about noise reduction right now. It's not really for this lesson. So I'm then going to move on to the effects. It's just there, and then I'm going to add just a tiny bit of dehaze. Now I know it's obviously not a hazy day out there, but sometimes it just adds a little bit of contrast. So let's just pump that in just a little bit. Somewhere around 10 is, for me, fine. It's enough. So I'm starting to look at this image and thinking that from where it was when we started to where it is now, it just looks 100% better. It looks a whole lot better. So the only thing I may do, maybe just go up to the grad again, maybe just put just a tiny bit of saturation in the sky. So if I take off the overlay so I can see what it's doing. Now I know I said I didn't like saturation, but sometimes maybe put just a tiny bit in the sky and my computer catches up with itself. So you can see that maybe a bit of clarity in to make those clouds just pop a little bit more, and then maybe just bring down those highlights just a little bit so you can see. And there we go. For me, that is pretty much. There could obviously just be a little sort of things you could carry on doing the brush tool with the grad there, just to make it so that line's just not so sharp there. But you can see from the before and the after, we've got an image that looks 100% better. It's been corrected color-wise as far as I can, and all the dust spots are gone, and it's looking, as far as I remember, how I saw it on the day in Santa Maddalena, the Val di Funes of the Dolomites. So there you go, that's how I'm currently processing my work in Lightroom. Hopefully you've picked up a couple of things if you're new to Lightroom, or you're looking for just a different way and seeing how other people process their images. What's coming up next? I've got a number of ideas for tutorials that are coming up, but of course I know I have a number of subscribers now, so if you're interested in seeing various things, just let me know in the comments below, and then I'll see what I can do to fulfill your wishes. I know for this particular video, there's a number of people that had started to ask me how I process my images. But until the next time, thanks for subscribing. Thanks to all of my new subscribers that have come on board the last week or so. Thanks to my old subscribers. I really appreciate you all sticking around and appreciating what it is that I do as a landscape and travel photographer. So until the next time, I'll see you soon.